Today's daf is daf Samach Gimel, and we'll review the last point on daf Samach Beis Amid Beis. The Gemara quotes Acherim in a case where he had the Kohen at the time of the Shechita had two machshavos, l'shem Arelim and l'shem Mulim. It all depends. If he started with a machshava of l'shem Mulim, then the Shechita and the carbon is kosher. Even though he had a machshava l'shem Arelim subsequently, if he started in the reverse order and he began with a machshava l'shem Arelim, and then he ended with a machshava l'shem Mulim, in such a case, the carbon is possible. So it all depends on the sequence of his machshavos. That's the sheet of the Acherim, which the Gemara identifies as Rebby Meir, because whenever it says Acherim, it's a reference to Rebby Meir. And if he started with a machshava l'shem Arelim, the carbon is possible. If he started with a machshava l'shem Mulim, the carbon is kosher. So the Gemara here on the top of Samach Gimel, Lema kasavri Acherim, Eino l'shchita el basof ukid Rava. Rebby Meir's sheet, according to the way Rav understood it, is that ein l'shchita el basof. And here he had the second machshava after he finished the shchita, so that only the first machshava registers. If the first machshava was l'shem mulim, the carbon is kosher. If he started with the machshava l'shem arelim, the carbon is possible. And this is all based on Rava. Rava analyzes the machlokes between Rebby Meir and Rabbi Yossi that we've mentioned in the past and we've studied in the past in Tmura Daf Chafei. Rebby Meir and Rabbi Yossi debate the case of Harei Behemetzu Tmuras Ola Utmuras Shlomim. And Rebby Meir applies the principle of Tfos Lashon Rishon, and therefore the Behema on which he made this Tmura is now an Ola, because he started with Ola, so it's Tmuras Ola. Whereas Rabbi Yossi holds Af Bigmar Dvarav Adam Nitfas, and therefore it's a Tmura for both Ola and Shlomim. Both machshavos are accepted, but there that would cancel the kashrus of the carbon. The zevach is therefore yira ad she'istayv. It cannot be a kosher carbon. Rava says that we shouldn't understand that Rebby Meir is based on chazara, meaning that Rebby Meir understood that Fos Lashon Rishon because he changed his mind when he got to the second machshava. But rather, he's based on a different reasoning, and that is that the first machshava is chal, and once it's chal, the second machshava cannot be chal, even in a case where it wasn't chazar. So, for example, if he said, Harei chetia tmuras ola and chetia tmuras shlomim, clearly this is not a chazara case. He wants both. And according to Rava's interpretation, nevertheless, Rebby Meir would still maintain Tfos Lashon Rishon. Because, as we said, whenever you say something in sequence, it's the first Amira that generates the Chalos. And Abaye in the Gemara, in Chulin, in Tmur, disagrees with Rava. And we also find Rav Acha, Breder of Ika, in Chulin Daf Kuf Chav Ches, disagree with Rava. And they both say that according to Rebby Meir, Yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof, and Rebby Meir is based on the principle Tfos Lashon Rishon of Chazar. Now, if we accept Rava that according to Rebby Meir, ein l'shchita ela basof, Hilkach says our Gemara, hikdim mulim la'arelim. He started with machshava l'mulim, mulim chayli, arelim lo chayli. In other words, at the time of the shchita, there's only room in that split second of shchita for one machshava. He had a machshava l'shem mulim, and therefore the machshava of arelim was after shchita. And if it's after shchita, it's not going to be chal. And therefore the carbon is kosher. But hikdim arelim lemulim, arelim chayli, mulim lo chayli. The machshava of l'shem arelim is chal. And the machshava mulim is not chal because, as we said before, there is no room for a machshava l'shem mulim. He had at the sof shchita a machshava l'shem arelim, and therefore the carbon is pos. Omar Rabba disagrees. Lo, liolam kisavar acherim yeshna l'shchita mitchila vad sof. We could even assume that Rebby Meir is of the opinion that shchita is not chal at the end of the shchita, but even the beginning of the shchita. The reason for acherim in the case of hiktim arelim lemulim, the carbon is possible when he started with the machshavas arelim, is because hacham mayaskinon, the cases can go on shegomar belibo l'travayu. In his mind, he wanted to shech the carbon on behalf of both arelim and mulim and arelim bein lemulim bein l'arelim mahotzi bepiv, but he started in this particular case where the acherim pasal the carbon pesach litravayu, and he started hotzi bepiv la'arelim lo hispik lomar lemulim achenig mar shchita. It's very possible that although his intention was for both arelim and mulim, because he didn't get a chance to enunciate his machshava l'shem mulim until after the shchita was completed, therefore b'arelim b'ha pligi, Rebby Meir holds lo be'inim piveli b'shavit, even though there is a discrepancy here between what he said and what he wanted. In such a case, we don't need to reconcile that contradiction, and it all depends on what he said. Since he announced that he's shechting the carbon l'shem arelim, despite the fact that he claims he had in mind also l'shem mulim, but we determine halacha and the kiddush by his peh, by what he expressed, that he expressed l'shem arelim. And even though he said l'shem mulim, but that was too late, it was after the Gemara Shechita. And Rabbanan Savri be'inan piv v'libo shav, that it's not enough to generate a chalos based on a person's dibur and his haflas peh, but we also need libo, and his leiv here was not only to be makir the carbon on behalf of the arelim, but also on behalf of the mulin. He just didn't get a chance to speak out the arelim. The Gemara asks, "V'savar kasavar Rebby Meir lo be'inim pivuli v'shavit." I'm going to quote to you a Mishnah in Trumos, where again it's not Rebby Meir explicitly mentioned by name in Truma, but nevertheless we have a principle of stam Mishnah ki Rebby Meir, and we have a stam Mishnah that indicates that we need piva libo shavit. Uraminu, his kaven lomar truma via omar maser via omar truma. So mistakenly he said the wrong thing. He meant to say truma, he said maser, or vice versa. Oh, another example. She Any nichlas abayse, his intention was to take an eder not to go into this particular house. The Omer instead, what came out of his mouth with those was lozeh, that he won't go into a different house. So he declared that he won't go into house B when he really meant to say house B. Oh, here's another case. Any nena lise, he meant to say I don't want to get hana from Reuven. It was Madra Hana from Reuven. That's what he meant to say. But V'yomar, what he actually said was Lozeh Mudra Hana from Shimon. Lo Amar V'klum. In all these cases, his dibur and his neder, which was made b'tos, is not chalachi leave piv v'libo shavin. So the Gemara therefore rejects that interpretation of Rebby Meir the Acher El Amar Abaye substitutes, and he says Reicha the Omar. In the case where he's makdim mulim ta'arelim, he said Hareini shochet Simon rishon lemulim, and Simon sheni afla arelim. The Simon sheni nami psichi be mulim, so that even when he got to the second Simon, he had a mixture of two machshavos of l'shem arelim, but he also had a machshava l'shem mulim, and therefore the pesach is kosher. Seifa, on the other hand, if he was makdim arelim before mulim, the carbon is possible. The Omar Simon Rishon la'arelim and Simon Sheni lemulim. And now we get to the issue about mefaglin b'chatzi mati. The Simon Rishon holo psichi be mulim. As far as the first Simon is concerned, he had a total, complete machshava l'shem arelim. And Rebby Meir l'tamei, Yacherim, Rebby Meir, are consistent with their view. Diomer Menocha, Staf Tezayin, Mefaglin, Bechatzi Mat. In other words, a machshavas pigul is a machshava mefageles, even if he only thought about that machshava chutz l'zmano, Bechatzi Mat. So, for example, he shechted the first simon, and at that point in time, he had a machshava of chutz l'zmano, even though the karban will only be completed and the shchita will only be valid after he completes the second simon, but nevertheless, he can create pigul with a machshava hamafageles b'simon rishon, and that's called mafagel mechatzi mat rabbanon. They disagree here with the acherim, and they hold that even in a case of Arelim and then Mulim, where he had Machshava L'Shem Arelim, the first Simon, nevertheless, the carbon is kosher, Tamayu. They are being consistent. The Omer Ein Mefaglin B'Chatzi Mat. So that when he had a Machshava of Chutz L'Zmano, in the case of Pigul, for the first Simon, it doesn't engender Pigul. And here, in our case, when he had a Machshava during the first Simon L'Shem Arelim, the carbon is not Nifsal, because the Shechita is only completed with both Simonim, and at the time of the Simon Sheni had a Machshava L'Shem Mul. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. The Torah says, "Osishchat al chametz dam zivchi," meaning you're not allowed to shech the korban Pesach at the time that there's chametz in the rishus of the shochet. He has possession of chametz. The Mishnah is going to now clarify in what situations do you violate this law, and does this apply in a case where he was makriv other korbanos on Erev Pesach, and he had chametz in his possession. Ashochet is a Pesach ala chametz. He has a kizayis of chametz in his possession. Over belosas. If he shechted the carbon, he violated the law of losishcha al chametz dam zivchi. That's the shita of the Tanakam. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af hatamid, even if he shechted the tamid shel ben arbayim on Erev Pesach, and he shechted it with chametz in his possession, he violates the law of lo sishcha. And that's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, that we expand the lo sishcha to include not just the shchita of the korban Pesach, but also the shchita of the tamid shel ben arbayim. And now we have a third sheet in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Omer, ha-Pesach bar basar, if he shechted it lishmo, chayav. The shechita is valid on the 14th of Nisan after Chatzos if he shechted l'shem Pesach. And therefore be chayav if he owns chametz, a kazayis chametz, for violating the law of lo sishcha chametz. Why? Because the shechita is a shechita re'uya, it's a shechita kshera. However, Shalolishmo, but let's say he shechted this korban Pesach Shalolishmo, but rather l'shem shlomim, potter. Why? Even though he has chametz in his possession, he shechted korban Pesach bismano. Nevertheless, a Pesach that was shechted bismano Shalolishmo is possible. There are only two karbonos where Shalolishmo passes the korban. One of the two is Pesach, the other is Chatas. So this becomes now in a shchita shalol l'shma of Pesach bismano a shchita she'ena ruya, and Rabbi Shimon holds that shchita she'ena ruya lav shmei shchita. That is Rabbi Shimon's halacha and his principle, which is recorded above a comment of Ayin Amud Aleph. Ushar kol zvachim, if he shechted with possession of chametz on the 14th after Chatzos, another carbon other than the Pesach, bein lishman ubein shelo lishman pot. Even if he shechted the carbon lishman, but the halacha is that whether he shechted it lishman and it's all abayim l'shem chav, whether he shechted even shelo lishman, the carbon in shelo lishman in shar zvachim is kosher, even though it's not all abayim l'shem chova. And that's enough to pater him up, because Rav Shimon holds that when is he chayav for lo sishkat al chametz, for owning chametz at the time of the shechita? That's only with regard to Korban Pesach, and with regard to other karbanos, he's pot, and that's against Rabbi Yehuda. Ubim moed, if during Pesach itself he shechts the Korban Pesach ala chametz, lishmo potur, here what undermines the status and disqualifies the status of the shechita is the fact that he had machshava lishmo, because there is no Korban Pesach during the moed. And once he had a machshava lishmo during the course of the moed, that makes it into a shechita sheina ruya, and therefore he's potur for owning chametz. However, shalol lishman, if he had in mind l'shem shlamim, and the law of and the status of a Korban Pesach the rest of the year is that of a shlamim, so he had in mind l'shem shlamim is chayav. Then he's chayav for owning chametz in his possession. Ushar kol azvachim, with regard to a shechita during the course of Pesach of other karbanos, bein lishman, bein shalol lishman, chayav. He's chayav malchus for owning chametz for any zevach that he shechts, whether he shechts it lishman or shalol lishman, because all the zvachim that were shechted shalol lishman are ksherim, el shalol ol l'bayil l'shem chova, but they're ksherim, and therefore he violates the law of lo sishchal al chametz tam zivchi chutz min achatos she shchatol shalol lishma, because as we said earlier, there are two karbanos where shalol lishma completely undermines and disqualifies the karban, and one of them is a chatos. So therefore, a shechita of a chata shalol lishman is psula, and that makes it into a shechita sheina ruya, which is not a shechita. Therefore, he doesn't violate the law of lo sishcha. The Gemara quotes Rav Shimon ben Lakish: "Li'olam eino chayv ad sheyeh chametz l'shochet o l'zorik." This violation of lo sishcha applies to both the shochet and the zorik. If either of those two have chametz in their possession at the time of the Havas HaKarban and Erev Pesach after Chatzos, there will be a violation and a chiyuv malchus of lo sishchar al chametz dam zivchi. Now, is Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish telling us, therefore, that the shochet is chayav for chametz in the reshus of the zorek? The tzlach says that's not so. Ein hashochet chayav al chametz shebershus hazorek, ela hakavana shazorek over kichazorek al chametz bershuso. However, there is a Rivan who says that the shochet will violate the lav of lo sishchat if there's chametz in the reshus of the zorek, and it's a case where he knows, the shochet knows that there's chametz in the reshus of the zorek, and he violates the law. So that's the machlokes, oddly enough, between the Rivan and the tzlach.